Good afternoon, members of the Commission. I'm Dr. Pablo Rodriguez. I'm former medical director of Planned Parenthood, and I am also a spokesperson for the Citizens for Responsible Government, which is a coalition of civil, reproductive, and workers' rights opposing the establishment of a constitutional convention. I'd like to read my following opinion piece. This November, Rhode Island voters will be asked if they want to hold a constitutional convention in 2015. The Rhode Island state constitution requires that this question appear on the ballot every decade. The last time state voters were asked, they rejected holding a constitutional convention, and with good reason. While supporters of a con often claim it can reform government, history demonstrates that the issues raised often have little to do with ethics or reform. Instead, ballot questions coming out of the convention could erode access to a range of individual rights that Rhode Islanders strongly support. Back in 1986, while I was serving as medical director for Planned Parenthood of Rhode Island, I found myself the object of a great deal of hurtful personal criticism. It was a dangerous time when large groups of anti-abortion protesters stormed women's health centers all across America, and when providers like myself took enormous personal risks, and some were even murdered, as they delivered important and completely legal reproductive health services to women who needed them. But in Rhode Island, a 1986 Constitutional Convention narrowly approved by a single vote a ballot questions requiring that our state constitution declare that life begins at conception. Clearly, this language would have flown in the face of Roe v. Wade, the 1973 Supreme Court decision legalizing abortion. It could also have impacted access to a range of reliable, safe, and common contraceptive methods opposed by those who also object to legal abortion. A host of concerned advocacy groups like the ACLU of Rhode Island and Rhode Island Now, along with Planned Parenthood of Rhode Island, and many concerned individuals and medical and legal professionals worked tirelessly to educate voters about the dangers of this provision. Ultimately, Rhode Islanders voted by a 2-to-1 margin not to approve this question, but only because of an expensive, time-consuming effort. And despite this important victory against extremism, a second anti-abortion amendment passed by the convention, one that was not as obviously sweeping, was approved by the voters and remains in our Constitution to this day. Some claim that a constitutional convention is a purer form of democracy, but really delegates to a con are often political insiders, including even legislators' families and family members, chosen in an off-year election when voter turnout is very low. And because these delegates will not face re-election, they don't need to be accountable to voters. Only 18% of the electorate elected delegates to the last convention. In states across the country where ballot questions are a common feature on Election Day, controversial and divisive issues have become regular fodder for expensive campaigns promoted by special interests. Campaigns that attack gay rights, civil rights, immigrant rights, affirmative action, the right of workers to organize, even gun ownership rights have all become subjects of state ballot questions. The risks to our minority communities and to women in these situations are enormous. Necessary legal challenges to these policies are costly and can take years to resolve. While some risks are constant, others have grown since 1986. Today, wealthy out-of-state political donors can see small states like Rhode Island as inexpensive proving grounds for issues they want to promote more broadly. As a result of numerous court decisions, unlimited amounts of money can be spent by these groups to prove their points, and they focus over and over again on ideologically driven social issues. Finally, a constitutional convention isn't free. 30 years ago, it cost Rhode Island almost $1 million to convene it and to pay for the ballot questions that resulted. Estimates that it could cost 4 to 5 times that much to convene a convention in 2015. With everything else we Rhode Islanders want and need, where would that money come from? What important programs or services, or highway repairs or disaster response would take a hit to convene a con? At a time when half of legislators are running for re-election unopposed, voter activism and greater participation in the electoral process would be a better medicine than the illusion of reform through a con. Real reform needs to and can occur at the State House with the right leadership. Let's not be dazzled by the promise of a bright, shiny object, the false hope of a constitutional convention. Instead, let's hold our elected officials responsible for the ethics reform we all know is needed and they can and should deliver. A specific suggestion that I would have for the members of the commission as you prepare your report would be to estimate the actual cost of the special election that would elect the delegates, because the voters need this information in order to make an informed decision this fall when the question is asked. We have a potential $400 million structural deficit in the next few years. And casino finance economies all throughout the Northeast are seeing their revenues down. We're seeing casinos going belly up in Atlantic City. And our state budget is so directly tied to casino gambling that every dollar that we spend should be carefully scrutinized. Engaging in an exercise like the CON will necessarily affect those most vulnerable who depend on government services. A fiscal statement calculated independently should be an essential part of the question whether to hold the convention. If not in the language of the question, at least it should be included as part of any educational outreach or printed informational materials developed by the Secretary of State. I thank you for the opportunity to address this commission.
Are there any questions or comments for Dr. Rodriguez? Certainly proceed.
Just two questions. You were talking about your concern of the Constitutional Convention back in 1986 about the issue of the right to abortion, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Now, if I recall, in 1986, the ballot, the constitutional amendment went down by a 2-to-1 margin approximately?
Yes.
Okay. And the second is, even if it had been adopted, it would have been in conflict with the interpretation of the U.S. Supreme Court as to the right to abortion, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments?